Have you ever met someone who looked like they had it all together? Confident, charming, untouchable. Yet when the mask slipped, if you realize something deeper, something fragile, or something hurting, when we talk about the hidden weight of image, if we're really talking about something that every single one of us has brushed up against in daily life, if it doesn't matter whether you've dealt with someone clinically labeled a narcissist or not, the truth is the craving for image, for appearance, if for control of how others see us, that exists all around us. Some people just carry it like an extra heavy load, and the weight becomes their entire identity. Imagine the coworker who always needs to win the meeting, not because the idea is better, but because losing would feel like disappearing, or the friend who seems full of stories about their success, their purchases, their achievements, but when you sit with them in silence, there's no warmth, no ease, no relaxation. They can't put down the performance. They're still carrying that invisible suitcase full of expectations and fears. Here's the paradox, the louder the show on the outside, the quieter and lonelier the room on the inside. Narcissists build an entire identity around how they want to be perceived, confident, superior, untouchable. But it's as if they're living on a stage that never goes dark. And we know from our own experiences, when you have to keep performing endlessly, exhaustion creeps in. It doesn't matter how good the act is. Sooner or later, you feel the fatigue of pretending. Now, here's where it becomes inspiring for us, because once you begin to see this pattern, if you stop taking it personally, think about how freeing that is. The moment you understand that someone's sharp words or dismissive tone are more about protecting their own fragile image than about you, the ground shifts. If you realize you are not the target, you are simply standing in the line of their fear. And when you can stand there without absorbing it, if you begin to rise above. Let's make this real with a simple daily life picture. Imagine you text a friend to share some good news about yourself. Instead of celebrating you, they quickly redirect the conversation to their own accomplishment. In the past, maybe you'd feel invisible, unworthy, like your joy was somehow small compared to theirs. But when you understand the hidden weight of image, you realize they weren't diminishing you. They were protecting themselves from the feeling of being left out, from that deep inner emptiness that whispers, "What if I'm not enough?" Suddenly, you don't need their validation, you can hold your joy with both hands without apology. That's what it means to be unbound. Or think about a manager at work who criticizes harshly, nitpicking every detail, never satisfied. Once you understand that perfectionism is their armor, their way of keeping the image polished, you stop letting their voice define your worth. Instead of shrinking under their judgment, you step back and think, this isn't about my capability. This is about their fear of imperfection. You still learn what you need to improve, but you no longer let the sting of their delivery determine your confidence. That shift is massive. It's not just psychology, it's liberation. And here's the deeper truth, all of us carry some version of that image weight. Maybe it's the pressure to look successful on social media, to keep up appearances in front of family, or to act like everything's fine when inside we're overwhelmed. When you see the narcissist's hidden depression, you're also holding up a mirror to yourself. How much of my energy goes into protecting my image? How often am I tempted to mask my insecurity by talking louder, doing more, or pretending I don't care? What inspires me, and what I hope inspires you, is the idea that awareness itself is power. Once you see the game being played, you don't have to play along. You can put down the mask, and in doing so, you stop being pulled into someone else's performance. That doesn't mean you'll never feel hurt by arrogance or ignored by self-centeredness again. But it does mean you'll see it differently. And when you see it differently, you respond differently. You don't spiral into self-doubt. You don't waste endless energy trying to win their approval. You don't fight battles that can't be won. Instead, you begin to stand on a new foundation, your own groundedness. You say to yourself, I will not let someone else's image project determine my value. You carry your head higher, not because you're better than them, but because you've stopped letting their weight become yours. And isn't that what we're all longing for? To walk through the day a little lighter, a little freer, no longer bound by someone else's fear of being small. Every time you choose not to absorb the sting of someone's mask, If you take a step closer to your own authentic strength, that's where inspiration lives, not in changing them, but in refusing to be chained by their hidden depression. So the hidden weight of image is not only their prison, it can also be our teacher. It shows us the cost of performance, the emptiness behind the show. And if we're wise, we take the lesson into our own lives, we set down the weight, if we breathe deeper, and we step into a freedom that isn't about appearances at all, but about truth. And truth, unlike image, doesn't break under pressure. Truth liberates. The idea of becoming unbound is more than just a clever phrase. It is a life-changing posture. To be unbound means we stop living as if someone else holds the pen that writes our story. And that's exactly what happens when you've been in the orbit of a narcissist. Their voice becomes so loud, so demanding, so relentless, that after a while you begin to measure yourself by their reactions. If they're pleased, you feel safe. If they're critical, you feel worthless. You end up tied to an invisible chain, one that tugs at your confidence and keeps you questioning, am I enough? But freedom begins with a startling realization you don't have to win their approval to be whole. That's a powerful shift, and it shows up in the smallest, most ordinary moments of life. Imagine this: you share an idea at work. A narcissistic boss immediately shoots it down, dismisses it without consideration. Before, you might have walked back to your desk carrying a bag full of shame, wondering if you should have stayed quiet, convincing yourself that you had nothing valuable to say. But when you're unbound, the script changes. You tell yourself, their dismissal doesn't define my creativity. My idea still has worth even if they couldn't see it. Instead of shrinking, you begin looking for other ways to bring your idea forward. And that's what unbound looks like. It's choosing not to let their blindness keep you from your own vision. Or picture a family gathering where one relative, always hungry for control, dominates the conversation, putting others down with subtle digs. If you've sat through these dinners before, leaving with your confidence chewed up, but now unbound, you don't internalize the comments. You hear the sting, but you also hear the insecurity behind it. You respond with calmness, maybe even silence, but inside, you're steady. You don't carry their voice home with you, you get to leave the table lighter because you're no longer living chained to their opinion. Being unbound isn't about revenge or proving the narcissist wrong. It's about refusing to let their shadow swallow your light. This isn't easy, because part of you has been conditioned to think, if I just do better, if I just please them, maybe then I'll have peace. But the peace never comes, does it? That's because the chain isn't broken by perfection. It's broken by courage, the courage to walk away from their definition of you and into your own. Here's another daily life picture. Think about social media. So many of us scroll, comparing ourselves to polished images of success and beauty. It's not narcissism in the clinical sense, but the pull is similar. We begin to feel less than because someone else looks more than. To be unbound here means to close the app and remind yourself, those curated images don't tell the truth of real life, you are not behind, you are not less, and your worth isn't up for public approval. That same principle applies when dealing with narcissists. Their highlight reel of superiority is just that, a reel, a mask. You don't have to buy into it. Unbound living also means embracing boundaries. A lot of people think boundaries are walls, but they're really doors that you control. You decide who enters, how far they come in, and when it's time for them to step out. When you set a boundary with a narcissist, whether it's limiting conversations, refusing to argue, or walking away from manipulation, you're not being cruel. You're saying, I will no longer let your storm drown my peace. And in that moment, you are declaring that your inner world matters. That's unbinding yourself from their control. Think of how empowering it feels the first time you try it. Maybe a narcissistic friend tries to guilt you into doing something you don't want to do. In the past, you would have caved, worried they'd be angry or withdraw affection. But this time you take a breath and say, no, that doesn't work for me. At first, fear surges. What if they lash out? But then you realize something powerful. Their reaction is theirs to carry, not yours. If you feel the chain slip a little looser, that single no was an act of freedom. Being unbound is a process, not a one-time decision. It's learning, if again and again to separate your identity from their behavior. And every time you do, you reclaim a piece of yourself. Slowly, you gather those pieces into a whole that is strong, resilient, and unshakable. The beauty is that being unbound doesn't make you hard or bitter. In fact, if it softens you toward yourself, you start offering yourself compassion, patience, and grace, the very things a narcissist could never consistently give. If and when you live that way, your relationships shift. You attract people who value authenticity, who celebrate your presence rather than compete with it. If you begin to create a life where love and respect flow freely because you're no longer tied down by someone else's emptiness. So the heart of this second point is simple but profound. You cannot change a narcissist but you can change how tightly you let them hold the reins of your life. You can loosen the chain, step out of the shadow, and claim a freedom that belongs to you by birthright. To be unbound is to remember that your worth is not up for debate. And once you taste that freedom, you'll never want to go back.